and welcome to Module 1. In this module, we will have input from texts, which are a blend of theoretical and practical sources, input from higher education professionals, input from other reading research, like articles that you're reading for various assignments or interviews. And my hope is for integration so that we can practice a mutually reinforcing loop of theory, reinforcing our praxis, and praxis refining and helping us better articulate our theory. In this module, we will read for a foundation. So there's the three texts. With Palmer and Zajonc, we will continue our self-reflection and leadership formation emphasis. The Schloss and Krag chapters are directly related to institutional structures and employees and departments within that structure. And particularly for these chapters, feel free to skim the material about which you are already knowledgeable. But also accreditation and a chapter on accreditation and a chapter on HR. And you may want to flip those last two chapters, flip when you read them, read HR first and then accreditation. That might be more meaningful, but it isn't necessary. And finally, the Bowman and Gaius book is an excellent source on academic administration with a pragmatic approach on actual university management. And a note on the Bowman and Gaius book, I did create a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't narrate it, but just with some of the themes and highlights of the book, and that is saved under course resources. For reading, we also will have articles specific to academic freedom, which obviously is a high priority to faculty, but very much impacts the operations of a university, and articles related to accreditation and university systems. I would encourage you to note the authors of all texts or articles and consider their role, their institution. This will help you frame the source and better understand the perspective or purpose for which the content was written. This module we will view, well, you are already viewing this Module 1 overview, and you will also watch a PowerPoint created by our Chief HR Officer here at Bethel. Her name is Kara Wald. This module we will respond. This week, the only required assignment is the module discussion board, and the prompts are stated in the syllabus and in the week and in the Module 1 discussion board link. But if you choose to do a journal as one of your optional assignments, then your first journal entry will also be due this module. Again, the prompts are in the syllabus and the journal link. And in this module, we will plan. Finally, I'm asking you to plan ahead. As early in this module as you can, please select a topic and begin research for your literature review assignment. An initial draft will be due at the end of the second module. Also, you may want to consider completing an article review, watching the online enabler video and writing that paper, or setting up future interviews with administrators. Administrator schedules can be full, so those may necessitate significant pre-planning. Again, my overall purpose in bringing this up is just to plan ahead, because the course will become busier and busier as you move through each week. When we talk about post-secondary institutions, the first few chapters of the Schloss and Krag book is about post-secondary institutions and gives you a little bit of a institutional landscape, which is helpful before we dive into university structures and systems. First, this pie chart provides a visual for some of the Schloss and Krag data from Chapter 1. However, an important reminder is that although private nonprofits are the most numerous of all four options presented here, and public 4 years are the fewest, this is only the number of accredited institutions in the United States. This is not proportionate to the number of students enrolled. This is very important. In fact, it's the opposite. Public institutions enroll the most students, and the private for-profit enrolled almost half as many as private nonprofit, despite the discrepancy in the number of institutions. This context is important for us, as it is easy for the university setting in which we are in, or with which we are familiar, say as alumni, to become our default and really shape our perspective on higher education topics. We don't want to have a narrow viewpoint that would result in inadvertently ineffective decisions or a narrow perspective. resources. In this module, we will consider institutional employees and human resources. And HR is incredibly important, which is why I chose to put this topic first, because it is the way we form our permanent community. Students matriculate through in 2, 4, 6 years, depending on the degree, hopefully, a certain period of time. But those of us who are part of the staff, administration, and faculty, we are part of the permanent community. Our students really do become who we are. So we can teach and deliver content, but the reality is that in all things our actions speak louder than our words. So the people who we choose to put on our staff and faculty are important, as they become the role models for our students. We want our students to think and act in certain ways. Then we need to be very careful about what type of role models we provide our students. So Kara Wald, in her presentation available on your course Moodle site, will talk about HR primarily from the staff and administration perspective. Her role has slightly changed since she created the video just recently, but here she covers legal compliance, care for employees, etc. It's important to note that faculty hiring is very different. Faculty hiring is done by committee and through the office of the provost. Speaking from my experience as an assistant provost, faculty hiring is one of the most significant factors in impacting student retention and ultimately institutional success. This is about choosing the people who are going to be in the classroom with our students. As an academic administrator, I spent a lot of time talking with faculty about the integration of faith and learning, arguably one of the most critical components of a faith-based college or university. That is distinctive, we want faculty to be able to articulate the ways that their Christian commitment impacts the learning in their field. Another important area, at least for me, was the hiring of diverse faculty. Unfortunately, this is an area that higher education institutions across the country struggle with, both public and private. Oftentimes, the faculty demographics do not reflect the student demographics in terms of race and ethnicity. A few learnings that I would emphasize in regard to hiring faculty. In searching for faculty, it's very important to pay attention to our search criteria when we are recruiting faculty candidates. It is easy for us to think about things in the way that we understand them, right? And it's easy for us to say that we want a candidate who is completely outside of our box or who brings new and fresh ideas, but the reality is that the way that we shape our positions, we often shape them to resemble a certain kind of person. One of the ways that I discovered that we do that is by using insider language. At Bethel, those might be terms like irenic spirit or pietism, and you might not even know to what I am referring, but that is precisely the point. Because internally at Bethel, we understand those terms. We speak that language. We are looking for a certain type of person. But when you unpack that, the only people who are going to understand what that means are people who grew up in this tradition, who look and think and act like us. So be cautious about insider language that sends a message that if you do not speak this language, you do not belong. And that has been very challenging for our search committees to think critically about the way that we are recruiting candidates and how we are inviting people to join us if we really do want diverse perspectives. And when we invite people with diverse perspectives, then we need to be trustworthy in that process. Spend some time in the Chronicle and you will see numerous examples of situations in which people were hired, often because their diverse perspective was desired, only to find that their perspective was actually too diverse. This is a common situation in theology departments that often demand that faculty uphold very specific denominational doctrines. So how do we demonstrate trustworthy practices in the hiring process and after the hiring to continue to support these faculty and staff? And finally, I guess I would just say be committed. We need to create an atmosphere embracing of diversity, encouraging of multiple points of view, and this helps all of us to develop more cognitive dissonance and cultural competence. Faculty hiring is important, and hiring of diverse faculty is important, and this remains a challenge. In thinking about institutional systems, I am shaped by the work of Hale. In What Makes Racial Diversity Work in Higher Education, Hale stated, "We can learn to notice the culture of power around us." This is really important for us to pay attention to. What symbols do we use? For example, if you look at our catalog, are we accurately reflecting the way that we look as a community? The types of initiatives we commit to, or budget breakdowns? And I guess I'm speaking both institutional and personally here, or from a leadership perspective, in terms of our image and how we present ourselves. both that we are accurately reflecting ourselves or our institution, and to be aspirational to some degree, so people know where our values are. Also, pay attention to who we are including or not when we make decisions. I've noticed that some universities were very inclusive in making our education accessible. We all want that. However, it is not very often that disability services are brought to the table in program creation decisions. If you asked anybody, of course they would say that we care about making education accessible. But in order to do that, we have to have the right people at the table. Another Hale quote: "Those inside the culture of power rarely notice it, while those excluded are often acutely sensitive to how they and others are being marginalized." This reminds me of the classic story of the two young fish who are swimming downstream and pass an older fish swimming upstream. The older fish says, "How's the water?" And the younger fish look at each other and say, "What's water?" Those of us who are embedded in positions of power, whether through social location or position authority, often are unaware of the reality of life for those who are not part of the power structure. So another good reflection prompt is, how will you acknowledge and manage your power as a leader? Accreditation. This module we will also learn about accreditation. I provided some different resources so you can familiarize yourself with the accreditation process, but I also want to encourage you to spend some time with the actual accreditation guidelines. I provided that website specifically because what I've found is that people think of accreditation in ways that are entirely different than the reality of accreditation. People often believe accreditation guidelines are very specific, and really they're not. The standards are often very broad, reflective of the idea that strong institutions are institutions that follow certain types of practices. And then accreditors determine how an institution fulfills those types of practices. But accreditors really allow institutions to shape their response to those values in various ways. So I think you might be surprised if you haven't looked at the actual accreditation guidelines before about what they do and do not dictate. It is very much a general set of guidelines and a common sense approach as to what makes a quality institution. I have worked with accreditation, both regional and secondary or professional, and all have allowed great latitude to the ways that we applied the principles to what we did. So to be honest, from my experience, I am not afraid of accreditation and government regulation, and in fact have found it to be a very good thing, a constructive process even. I believe in accountability. I believe that as higher education professionals, we should hold ourselves and one another to good, if not even exceptional behavior. And unfortunately, it is not always the case that we self-regulate to the degree that we do not need that accountability. And even if we wanted to self-regulate to that degree, an institution doesn't always have the knowledge and exposure to know how to do that or what those expectations should or could be. So I'm actually one who supports some version of the current process. Could it be improved or updated? Absolutely. Is it always a joy or fun to follow government regulations? Maybe not, but there is definitely a place for them when federal resources are involved. Some prompts to consider, or even ask administrators. If you do administrative interviews, what are the strengths and challenges of accreditation and accountability process? Kara talked in her presentation a bit about her compliance with legal requirements, and that can be challenging. But I also know Kara is one who would say that regulations exist to protect us and make us better. For further reflection, why do some educational leaders bristle at regulation? And how can we, as educational leaders, respond in positive and productive ways to these guidelines that are likely not going away? So we asked how we will acknowledge and manage your power as a leader. One approach comes from Palmer and Zajonc, and I will conclude with this as a sort of blessing and challenge for the beginning of this course. One of the quotes from that text was, "Think the world together instead of thinking it apart." Throughout our education process, especially our college education, we do a lot of deconstruction, which is absolutely important, especially because the more you do it, the more you realize that many of our constructs are based on assumptions, not all of which are correct. But in this doctoral program, where we really want you to focus on integration and synthesis. Integration of self, content, leadership practices. This prompt is a great way of envisioning the kind of education that we want to have happen. So never stop questioning your assumptions, but always remember to bring your deconstruction back to a constructive way of thinking and being in the world. Practice this in your community, this cohort. As we have said before, this is a safe space, your leadership lab. So open yourself up to refinement, solicit feedback, and be consciously and actively, to borrow Paul Marantz-Lejean's phrase, learning from this community of knowers. I'm sorry this was a long PowerPoint. I hope that gives you some additional ideas and content to consider for this module, and I hope you enjoy the reading and your interaction with each other. I'm looking forward to your responses. Please contact me with any questions. Thank you.